audience, that you ask new questions, you challenge yourselves, you challenge each other, and there's lots of room for dialogue in this conference. We have 5-minute research summaries, and we are, for all those who are giving 5-minute research summaries, we are holding you to that, because we want lots of time for audience questions and engagement. I see lots of people who look really nervous. You know, I had so many emails saying, I just can't keep it to 5 minutes. I'm like, well, we're all gonna be in it together. We have ideas sessions, we have question posing sessions, we have plenary panels. So we're trying to keep it as interactive as possible. So remember at the 5-minute mark when the chair cuts you off, gracefully and respectfully, that's okay, we're all in the same boat together. So today we have a really exciting agenda lined up, but before we get to that, we have some wonderful opening remarks. So I would like to call up Mayor Jamie Snook to bring opening remarks on behalf of the town of Happy Valley, Goose Bay.
Well, thank you, Ashley. Good morning to everybody, and I would also like to reiterate my thanks to Grand Chief Cupie and the Chief First Nation for welcoming us last evening on Innu territory, and I certainly thought we couldn't have opened the conference in a more fitting way. And as you'll see throughout, diversity is one of our main strengths in this region. And Happy Valley Goose Bay is very excited to try to measure up over the next 2 days. This past year, we've adopted a new research policy and hope to be proactive and engage with all of you in the research community. We do have a poster tonight, so I'll put in a plug for you to come by and read more about that at that time. But in the past year, we've certainly seen personally the power that comes from good research and even better communication of the results. And I guess I'm thinking about all of the debates that happened last fall around methyl mercury and hydro development and so on. And it really brought home to me how important all of your work is, and with that ability that each of you have also comes great responsibility. So over at the Labrador Research Forum, please think about your responsibilities and what your relationship will be with our communities. So with that, please take care, and I look forward to the days of learning ahead. Thanks.
I'd now like to welcome up Grand Chief Anastasia Cupie from the Innu Nation. Oh, there you are at the back there, sort of scanning the room, trying to find everyone's faces. Yeah, no, and Anastasia, as we were walking out, thank you again for welcoming us last night and yesterday afternoon for just such a wonderful day to start a conference off on the land, which is very important.
Thank you, Mayor Scott and Ashley. So I know this comes now. I know the one day with the hat to the my I know what to that the mama is gonna look. The general question got the bush got. So the two better game more not. Yes, we need not general that I see what matter. Mama did the better day more than it. Don't paginas the student. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning with the other Indigenous and community and government leaders. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of MP Yvonne Jones yesterday at our reception. And I don't know if she's here this morning. She is. Oh, there she is. And Mayor Snook. And the elders. On behalf of the Innu Nation, I'm pleased to welcome researchers, students, and community members to this research forum. And I'm pleased that Innu Nation is participating in the plenary program on caribou, protected areas, and research as reconciliation. These are all very important issues for our people. We are at the important crossroads in at the Sinan. Many of the things that we've taken for granted are changing around us, and at the rate of change is accelerating quickly. It's time to work together, all of us who value the land and the resources, to understand what is happening and to act together to ensure that those things that we care most about are maintained for future generations. For decades, we've tried to explain who we are as Innu people. Innu have been subject of many researchers for many years. Many have studied our land and our people, but even so, I think it has been a difficult topic to grasp. It is difficult for anyone to study, to encompass who we are, what's important to us, how our culture and language, what defines us, and what is our connected between our land, our rights, and our culture that we are determined to protect and maintain. I'm proud to say that Innu were among the last truly nomadic hunting peoples in the world. We sought balance and knew to do so through our parents and grandparents, who in turn learned from theirs to respect the land and the animals. It is difficult for me when I think of our elders and my mother and the impact that governments have had on their way of life, and it is still difficult for us to live with those impacts. Roads, rules, resource developments have changed much for us and has created an imbalance. I look forward to this research forum and Innu Nation's participation and to hear your thoughts and ideas about how relationships can be restored between us and with Canada. I hope that the researchers who are here will learn from us and understand that the direction that they must take in their work has to be driven by what's important to us. Research must incorporate our traditional knowledge as much as it is include hard science, perhaps even more so. One can be learned from a book, but traditional knowledge, the ways of our people, and our ties to the land and animals is much harder to understand. I invite you to listen, to take away, and to come back to us as we renew the relationship and together strengthen and create a deeper understanding of the work upon us. Thank you.
And I think that theme that you just ended with on renewed relationships is going to be very, very important for this conference, and we're going to hear a lot of different pieces about that. And now, as anyone who works in Labrador knows, weather changes and there are flight disruptions and travel disruptions. So President Johannes Lamp was unable to fly in because of high winds in Maine. But we are very, very lucky to have Minister Patricia Kumutsugak step in and provide opening welcome on behalf of the Nunavut government. And Minister Kumutsugak is the Minister of Education and Economic Development. So welcome.
Well, good morning. As Ashley has mentioned, I will be presenting opening remarks on behalf of President Lamp. Thank you for the kind invitation to provide some opening remarks for the inaugural biannual Labrador Research Forum. As President Lamp indicated in his message and conference booklet, there was a time when Inuit traditional knowledge was virtually ignored by the academic community, when our way of life, our customs, and our traditions were all but dismissed. I am very pleased to see on the agenda that some of our Nunavut government staff, researchers that have worked in Nunavut, and even some of our post-secondary students will be presenting at this conference. That's a huge accomplishment. Research was carried out without our knowledge or our input on issues that were not our priorities. Because of this, Inuit had a lot of resentment towards the academic community. We didn't trust researchers, we didn't like what they did, and we were resentful because the fact they didn't seem to care about what we thought about our culture and our way of life. But that is not the case today. We are now included partly because it is the right thing to do, and also because our input does indeed matter. Having said that, however, we still continue to face many challenges, particularly at the political level. When it comes to resource development and protection of our environment and culture and way of life, it's very important to us. and it needs to be important to everyone. For thousands of years, our identity as a people and as a unique society has shaped our relationship with the land, the animals, and with each other. We have used what we learned to sustain ourselves and to maintain our way of life. Like I said, in recent times, much of this knowledge that we as Inuit have taken for granted is recognized by the academic community as a valuable source of information for research and development. This acceptance of our traditional knowledge in many respects has strengthened our resolve to develop strategies that effectively ensures the sustainable use of our natural resources and ultimately helps preserve our cultural identity. Much of the academic research that was conducted in the past was intrinsically linked with domination and colonization. That in many ways eroded our cultural identity, again because it was done without our concept, knowledge, or input. It's hard to comprehend that not that long ago, researchers, even in our lifetime, that researchers sometimes illegally collected the remains of our ancestors and measured their skulls, for example, to determine whether we had the mental capacity to think the same as others. These same researchers assumed they knew everything that was to know about our people, of our way of life, our customs, our traditions, and our beliefs. This was a dark time in our history, a time when our existence was virtually ignored, when our lands and natural resources were being exploited for the benefit of others, when our right to self-determination was being denied, and when our language and other forms of our unique individuality was being taken away from us. As Nunavut moves forward from its birth as a political entity to a mature expression of a contemporary Indigenous society, Labrador Inuit seek to develop a profound understanding of how our cultural traditions will guide us into the future. While there are many good examples of where our traditional knowledge is being accepted and applied, there's still plenty of room for improvement. Whether it be in the management of our natural resources, the environment, or our wildlife, our input is vitally important. We have to continue to build on the successes we achieve, and that is why it is imperative for the research community to work with us in all aspects of research and to share the findings of all research with our communities to ensure policy and program developments meet our needs. As I alluded to earlier, what we have learned from the past will very much shape where we go in the future, while at the same time securing our cultural identity and way of life. Nakamik.
Thank you so much, Minister, for those words. And now I'd like to call up President Todd Russell from the Nunavut Community Council to provide opening remarks as well. Thank you, Todd.
Well, good morning to each of you. It's a beautiful morning out there. I want to thank Ashley and her team for the invitation to be here. It really has been a privilege for the Nunavut Community Council to be a part of the organizing of this particular forum. And not only were we invited, but we were welcomed, which is two different things. And not only were we welcomed, but we were valued for our participation around the table. And that hasn't always been the case. So it is with a warm heart and an open mind that I greet you and welcome you to our traditional territory, the territory of the Southern Inuit, which is shared territory with the Inuit, with the Nunatsiavut Inuit, and with those who have come here and call this place home. We have a saying that we've always been here because we can never remember coming here. We've just been. And this is our home. And a home that comes with such beauty, such opportunity, a place where we feel content, where we are well with ourselves. Hasn't always been that way. Many days, it's still not that way. But we know that our connection remains, and our resilience remains. Research is a powerful tool, and our people are no strangers to research. If you look at it in its broadest context, did we not observe? Did we not analyze? Did we not evaluate? Did we not reach conclusions about our land, about our weather, in our social relationships, in our sense of identity, in our sense of place? Of course we did. So I want to acknowledge as well the special knowledge holders in this room who come from our communities. Some cultures call them elders. We call them special knowledge holders for the most part. And so I want to acknowledge them, and I want to acknowledge all of the researchers in this room who have come. I believe in a good way to advance reconciliation that is meaningful to indigenous peoples, and in that way is meaningful to all peoples. I want to congratulate this first of a kind event in Labrador, and the change that is taking place. We're not there yet. The decolonization has not happened. We are not out of the woods, so to speak, yet. But so there's much to be done, but I want to thank the organizers for bringing this forum together. And I want to share with you the fact that we can do good things together. That we really can do good things together. But it is a path that we must acknowledge our truths. And I will speak a little bit more about that at the panel. So I want to warmly welcome you to these lands, to this place, to this special place. And I hope that it will enrich your lives. Because certainly, I mean, it has enriched mine and enriched ours as an indigenous people, as Southern Inuit. Thank you, and have a great conference over the next 3 or 4 days. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Russell. And I'd like to call now MP Yvonne Jones, who is no stranger to both Labrador, but also to the research world, and who's been very deeply committed to supporting research in Labrador for years. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ashley, and good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to acknowledge Mayor Snook, President Russell, Grand Chief Cupie, Minister Kamutsiak, and the elders that have joined us this morning, and all of you. I want to welcome you to Labrador. If this is your first time in the big land, I hope you will use every opportunity possible to see the tremendous, unique, and wonderful place in which we live. I am nowhere near being biased, but this is indeed the greatest place on the planet Earth. And I have not yet been off the planet Earth, but if I ever do, I will again make that analysis. So let's see. But you're in a part of our province and a part of our country today where you will not only see the uniqueness of land and territory, but you'll see and experience the uniqueness of people. People that are kind and generous, people that carry a tremendous amount of knowledge and expertise about the place in which we live in Canada's north. And I hope that you have an opportunity to meet as many of them as you possibly can and have those conversations. When Ashley opened this morning, she talked about this conference, bridging culture, knowledge, research, and science. And if there's one thing that our federal government has been very very, I guess, strong on trying to hammer home a message in Canada, and that is that we need to ensure that both culture, knowledge, science, and research go hand in hand in decision making at all levels, and that includes at the federal government level. Myself being a Southern Labrador Inuit and having the opportunity to now serve as a parliamentary secretary in the Department of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, primarily responsible for northern regions, including the territories Nunavut and Labrador, I've had the tremendous opportunity to work with a lot of you in this room and a lot of others who really wish they could be in this room, and looking at directions in the north and how we incorporate that traditional knowledge, that Aboriginal governance, that research that we have into making the very best possible decisions for the sustainability of Canada's Arctic and northern regions and the people who live there. I'm very proud of the fact that we immediately reinstated 65 scientists, and of which right now I think 12 have been rehired in Newfoundland and Labrador, and we're continuing to do that. We released a gag order on scientists and research. It's wonderful that once you do all this work, that now you really have an opportunity to talk about it. And you can share it with people. And I think, you know, it's such a simple thing to say, but the reality is that it wasn't happening. And it wasn't happening in a way that was really having a positive impact in our country. So that is changing. We've been very strong in reconciliation with Indigenous people, the strongest government ever in the history of this country to recognize the inherent right of Indigenous people in a way that, and a way that assimilation of Indigenous rights has occurred in this country. We have done that in many ways. I won't get into all of them this morning because the list is continuously long. But what I will say is this, and that is that we signed on to the calls of action under truth and reconciliation. Under those calls of action, 44 of those recommendations have already been actioned by our government, including those that had direct impact in Labrador, including the settlement of residential schools, a settlement for victims that were impacted. These are just small numbers, small pieces to a lot of people in Canada, but they are huge to us. They are huge to us in Labrador, and they're huge to us in being able to move forward with the things that we need to do. We also have did tremendous work with all the Indigenous groups in Labrador. Now when I go to schools in my riding and I watch children in the schools learning to make moose hide slippers like Ines is doing there now, and learning to make komatiks and snowshoes. This is traditional educational programs that did not exist in all the schools across Labrador before. But we're able to partner with Indigenous groups to do a lot of these things. I'm going to highlight very quickly some of the work we've been doing with Memorial University, and I think it's important to do that because even myself, oftentimes, I will get tapped on the shoulder and say, why is the government putting so much money into research? And why is it that every other day there's investments going in to the university to do this kind of work? And I know that in the past there has not been a lot of research grant money coming to Labrador or to this province, but I'm pretty happy to stand up and say that we've changed that. And right now we are earning in spades through the tremendous proposals, ideas, and innovation that people are bringing forward, huge amounts of investment in Memorial University and the Labrador Institute. We've invested in a new science building in the province. We've invested in the battery facility at Memorial University, which will enable us to do public engagement throughout the whole province and not just in restricted areas. We've been able to support ArcticNet, which many of you would be familiar with, which supports research for a whole range of researchers in Canada, including those that have been doing tremendous work in Labrador. We continue to fund Polar Knowledge and have increased the funding there. And we've also ensured that a lot of the investment under polar knowledge is going into northern regions across the country and not just into certain Arctic areas. We've been a strong advocate for the work, and I have been personally, of Trevor Bell, who's done tremendous work in Labrador, but also across the territories, and continues to do tremendous amount of work, especially in Nunavut. Also for Ashley and her work, we did partnership agreements with the Labrador Institute this year in research, which was great, and Sheila Downer, who's in the room, who's part of the Arctic group of Memorial University, and it's been great working with Sheila and Dr. Greenwood in doing the work that they're doing. A lot of this is for the sustainability and benefit of Labradorians. And we know that we need this kind of research and we need this kind of information and knowledge combined with the traditional and cultural knowledge that we have in order to move Labrador forward. And whether that's on some of the areas that we're working on right now, especially around housing in Labrador, transportation, healthcare, education, Aboriginal governance, environment, those are all pieces that are currently ongoing. And we're happy to be a part of that and to support that work. As you know, the federal government focus has really been on northern communities and northern regions. And we're thrilled to work with Memorial University, who has also accepted that same concept and direction. And under the Coast Strategy, we've been able to do some very key pieces that are directly relative to Labrador that will create tremendous and new opportunities in the future, especially around the mining industry and resource development sectors. And we are also including and partnering with the Indigenous governments on those pieces. I'm gonna kind of clue up here, but I wanna say to you that we recognize, and I do personally, the tremendous opportunities that come for people when we have good knowledge, good data, and good information. And I believe that what Ashley and her group is doing here is setting us on a right path of thinking together, working through challenges together, and finding those solutions and opportunities together. I wish you well in your deliberations over the next couple of days. I hope you enjoy your time in Labrador, and I hope that you leave feeling really fulfilled and feeling that you have really been able to gain tremendous insight into us as a northern region and are eager to come back and continue to do more. So thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me this morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jones. And thank you to everyone who provided welcome this morning, and thank you to the elders in particular who are in this room, who are the original scientists and researchers who sustain all of us for generations. And I really appreciate your time and energy and presence here, and we all have much to learn. And I think that what you've heard from all the opening remarks is actually going to tie in perfectly to the panel we're just about to start on research and reconciliation. And I think that the themes that have been raised are themes we're going to explore through the next couple of days in the conference, but particularly on this panel. And one of the themes is, that by the North and for the North, and research that is meeting needs and priorities, but is also answering the questions that the North has about themselves and about the world. I think you're seeing a huge change across higher education and a trend in research where it's no longer the questions that the South have about the North that need to be answered. It's the questions that the North is asking by themselves and looking for support. So we're looking at Northern-led leadership now. It's not about, and I think President Russell had brought it up, about others coming in and taking. It's about working together. And Memorial University is the only university in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And the Labrador Institute has a 38-year history of being that representation of the university in Labrador and meeting the needs and priorities of Labradorians. But as we're expanding and we're growing, it's meeting the needs here, it's meeting the needs in the North and the circumpolar North, but it's ensuring that Northern-led leadership and voices are what guides our agenda and what guides forward. So we have a special responsibility as an institute of higher education within the province, but also with responding to the calls from Truth and Reconciliation and from the TRC Commission. So that is why we decided to open this day up with a wonderful panel that I'm very delighted to be moderating because each of the people on this panel whether or not they realize it, have taught me a tremendous amount over the years, and it's been a real honor and privilege to now get to work with everyone. And so I would like to invite up, I'll start with you, Catherine, because you're first in my line of sight. Catherine Anderson is originally from Nunavut, but is now lucky for Memorial University, the special advisor to the president on Aboriginal affairs. So welcome, Catherine. I'll call up all the panels together. We have President Todd Russell, who you have already had the pleasure of meeting. We have Grand Chief Anastasia Cupie. And we have Minister Kamutsiak, who has graciously agreed to step in this morning since President Lamp was unable to make it. You can all come up to the I was waiting for everyone to come up, but you're all politely standing back. But no, we're just delighted at this panel presentation to begin and to learn from everyone, and to have discussions around reconciliation, but also resurgence and reclamation and renewal and relationships. And I can think of no better panel to start the day and no better thinkers to lead us in this talk. So the format of the plenary panel, as they're all getting set up, is each person will provide about 5 minutes of opening remarks and thoughts, and then we'll have a facilitated discussion among the panelists, and then there'll be lots of time for audience questions and interactions. So get your pens and papers out, and I think this is going to be an incredibly exciting panel to all think through together. President Russell, can we start with your opening remarks? I'm going to start farthest and bring it towards us. So I bring the microphones.
Am I ready? Well, good morning again, and I do want to acknowledge the leadership at the table. And I'm happy to be joining with my fellow Indigenous leaders to talk about a subject that, as I've said, is a powerful subject, a powerful tool. And I want to acknowledge the great responsibility that comes when people take on the word research. I think words are important. And I do want to acknowledge something Ashley said, which is institutes of higher learning. I just want people to reflect on those words. Higher learning. Does it give it a sense of dominance or superiority? When we talk about institutes of higher learning, are we talking about our special knowledge holders in our communities? When we talk about research, it sometimes gives the impression that it is objective, that the conclusions have been arrived at in some kind of formal process, and therefore it has certain authenticity or truth to it. I think we need to reflect that's not always the case. And so I believe that when we're going to talk about research as reconciliation, we're going to have to acknowledge truth. That research institutes, that researchers, some researchers themselves, have been agents of a system of colonization, that sometimes have been instruments of policy that have perpetuated colonization, that have tried to substantiate myth when it comes to Western governments, Western societies. And I believe that it's important that the research community understand its own truth and its own place. That's very, very important. We can't have reconciliation without truth. And so I think the research community really does need to come to grips with that and to acknowledge that and their place in it. You've heard examples already this morning about what research has done, dehumanized Indigenous peoples, took away identity, took away their sense of place. So research is a powerful tool, and it hasn't only been a powerful tool for good or for advancement. It has sometimes had a very damaging impact. And in this sense of truth, if you're working in Indigenous communities and with Indigenous people, I think there are two inalienable truths that the research community will have to come to grips with. That my identity is not up for debate. Who I am as a person is not up for debate. My identity is my truth, and that needs to be accepted. The second is the sense of place. This is the traditional land of Indigenous peoples, and you need to accept that truth. Without these two truths being accepted, I don't believe that we can have true and good research. These are fundamental. How can you, as a researcher, doubt and put out a person's identity or their sense of place? Because in Indigenous communities, these two are one and the same. We are nothing without our sense of place, our sense of home. This is who we are. This is what we are about. And so that informs, of course, our identity. So I believe that we must start from a place of truth if we're going to have a relationship. And really, there can be no reconciliation if there's not a relationship. And I would just ask for people to think about reconciliation. Who's reconciling with who? For what reason? Because there's no equality if we don't start from the same place in that equality framework. But it's the same kind of thing with reconciliation. Are you asking me to meet you halfway as an Indigenous person in this brokenness? Is that what you're asking me to do? How many steps are you asking me to take to be reconciled with who and for what? So I believe that we have to be mindful of the word reconciliation and what it actually means, particularly in the context of research. And then I do believe, though, what great opportunity that exists when good research can get done. What a great story that can be told. What great information that can come to be. And how meaningful that can be for people. Because at the end of the day, it's about our people. It's about our people being healthy and in a place of well-being. And so, what great responsibility that comes with that. And I understand my place in it. And I hope that we can have a relationship where we all understand our place in that. So I'll open those remarks and thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, President Russell. And Catherine, I'll turn it over to you now.
Should I move the mic or can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And it's a real honor to be here at this table with our Aboriginal leaders. I do have a few remarks. As Ashley said, I am the Special Advisor on Aboriginal Affairs at Memorial University. So my remarks are somewhat from that lens. So as I was thinking about research as reconciliation, I really thought about what those two words, I guess, mean to me. So if we think about research as identifying a question or a problem, and then performing a study to find an answer to that question or problem, and if we think about that research being conducted in the North, then research cannot be carried out in isolation from people or communities in the North, because it either directly involves them or it impacts them in some shape or form. So then if we think about reconciliation as building and maintaining respectful relationships, and in the context of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report, the building and maintaining of respectful relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians, I think the connection between research and reconciliation is clear. But before I go any further, I would also like to acknowledge the fact that there are legitimate concerns around by Indigenous peoples about reconciliation, and that for some, we need to be careful that we don't use reconciliation as just a buzzword. That it's important that if we're going to talk about reconciliation, and I think that it is important that we do talk about reconciliation, we need to have that conversation. But when we consider it, we need to consider it seriously. And when we talk about it, it can't be just as this idea, but there needs to be action associated with it. So if research is going to be an avenue for reconciliation, we must ask ourselves what that needs to look like. And I think first and foremost, well, reconciliation is all about relationship. So I think research also needs to be about relationship. There needs to be a relationship between the researcher and the community and the people. And that relationship has to be based in respect. And that's respect for Indigenous and traditional knowledges, Indigenous values, and traditions. And I believe, and I think Todd alluded to this, the idea and the notion of cultural humility. And I was really excited to see that we actually have one of the topics on the agenda where we talk about, where they will talk about cultural humility. And I think this is really important that for researchers, if you're assuming the researcher is non-Aboriginal from a post-secondary institution, and granted, we have more and more researchers that are coming from our own Aboriginal communities. But if you're thinking about a researcher as someone coming into the community, it's important that that person be self-aware, like Todd was saying, the place that they're coming from, the place that they're also going to, and keep that in mind. I just want to also talk about something that Nathan Albert, who's the president of the Inuit Tapiri Kanatami, spoke about at the Inuit Studies Conference at Memorial last fall. He talked about research and the importance of it having practical results. And I think this is important. Researchers have to consider the lives of the people that they are researching and put them first. So I think we heard that kind of throughout the opening remarks this morning, that we have to consider the priorities of the communities in the north and the people in the north. So in my role as Special Advisor on Aboriginal Affairs, I ask myself what our role is at the university and what we can do to ensure that our institution is supporting this. So I think one, we need to ensure that our researchers have a level of this cultural awareness and cultural humility. I think we have to look at how the university can support the researchers in facilitating their research practices, and whether that be through administrative policies or financial policies to ensure that the work that they're doing in the communities is carried out in a good way. Just, I think, raising a level of awareness through the university, and we've been doing that through, we've had Aboriginal Peoples Week for the last couple of years, where we've talked about research, where we've talked about reconciliation and what that means. And actually just last month we had our vice presidents come together to speak at a panel to talk about what they're doing around reconciliation, around university teaching and learning, around university research, the Aboriginal student experience, and governance and structures. So I think whether the research is in the fields of social sciences or humanities or business or science or medicine, whatever the case may be, I think it's important that we recognize that connection and the interconnectedness of everything in the north, and I think that's even more, I think we see that even more in the north than we do in the south. So again, I think reconciliation, when we talk about that, it's more than just an idea. There has to be action with it. So.
Great, thank you, Catherine, for those opening remarks. Minister Kinsiak, I'll turn over to you.
Can you hear me? I'm just trying to go off the top of my head because I was just asked to speak on this, so I wrote down a couple of notes. Reconciliation and what it means to us as the Nazi group. We need to rebuild our Inuktitut language, which has eroded from the residential schools. We also lost a lot of our culture, family connections, which we have to rebuild, as people were gone away from home for 4 to 5 years and missed the birth of some of their siblings and connections with their grandparents and their parents and their families. My husband and I were both residential school survivors, and that impacted and impacts our lives, as well as our children and grandchildren, as we had horrific, especially my husband, who had horrific experiences. The federal government and the provincial government and establishments such as university and churches need to implement an action, the 95 recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is very important. In respect to residential schools, the LIA and the Nazi government worked very hard to have the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement to have Labrador included. We worked tirelessly, and we did a lot of research to provide funds to prove our case. We were pleased that Stephen Cooper, through AWOC law firm, launched a class action lawsuit, and the federal government accepted and has set up a settlement for the Labrador people who went to residential schools. We've been doing some things to help in respect to some of the things that we've lost, such as we have started, well, it's halfway through, an Inuit Bachelor of Education program. We've partnered with Memorial University of Labrador Institute and ourselves to train 14 students to be Inuit teachers within our territory. And they're also learning the language through the Labrador Inuktitut training program, which is very successful. One of our major areas of concern is the loss of our caribou and the caribou band. We need further research, as the loss of caribou has vitally impacted the Nazi youth with food insecurity, and also with the Innu as well. It's a major issue, as many people are now more hungry than they were in the past. In respect to the Labrador residential schools, also, we've been in discussions with the province to develop Labrador residential school curriculum. We believe this is very important so that students can learn of our experiences and what has happened. In conclusion, we need research on what happened to the students, the families, the communities, and our people. We need to acknowledge that it happened. Need to be an apology and to put the 95 recommendations into action, so history does not repeat itself, which quite possibly could happen with the foster care and child welfare system as it is presently implemented today. I believe.
Thank you so much, Minister. And Grand Chief, you get the last word of the formal part of the panel, and then we'll turn it over to, I have a few questions for you, and then we'll go into audience discussion.
Okay. I'd like to explain what research is, what means in Innu, so that people will understand. They we done the research shot. In see what I can't do send it. They see it, what I check me, no, I just must go to Gata, and can't do send it. And yes, it's my thoughts. You just one month, tradition to send that up. You know, the new a deep to a deep in on to water. And what I remember a modest is a more than the translation to send that on Jawaka. Mr. Mijano to Chirani, no Taino, Mijajuano to send more. And remember, we done it to Madonna got good motor job, went to the post and even but I was and that was good to my with that, and that dead rats with my weight. And whenever she graduated the baggage with my job, my mom was that name one. They were with them and the quantity to and that to who you had to send more to the frustration or they need you and what annoying. And so did I told when I know if I would man. And when I know that even and so that I went. Okay. Good morning. On behalf of Innu Nation, I'm pleased to be here at this forum and to open a discussion focusing on the topic of research as reconciliation. As I said last night, we are at an important crossroads in the Sinan. There are many changes that are happening quickly across our lands. Research is necessary to understand how these changes are occurring, and it might provide us all with some keys to manage them. But this can only happen in the spirit of respect for our priorities as Indigenous peoples. For far too long, research is something that has been done to us, not something that has been done with us. Researchers has been on the front lines of every major development that has proceeded in our territory without our consent. This started with the geologists and engineers who claimed our lands for mines and hydro dams, and anthropologists and sociologists who decided that our way of life was primitive and that we needed to become modern. It's continued with the provincial biologists and other so-called experts who once testified in the environmental assessment hearings that the low-level flying jets, roads and reservoirs don't have any significant effects on caribou, but now claim that few Innu hunters are putting the entire herd in danger of being extinct. We know that the world is not a machine that can just be taken apart and understood scientifically. Our world is also informed by our values and by our responsibilities to maintain good relationships with the land and animals. For us, caribou are not simply subjects for study and community, but fellow beings that we need to respect. The same goes for our people and communities. We've had a long-standing policy of only working with researchers who can demonstrate that they understand and respect our rights to our own information, and who are prepared to work with us to obtain a free, prior, and informed consent. By working with researchers who respect our rights and our values, we build up our own bodies of data and expertise. We believe that the research that Innu Nation has initiated has made a significant and positive contribution to understanding of the Sinan, the land we call home. Over the past 40 years, Innu Nation has done a number of our own studies, primarily in the areas of Innu land use and occupancy and archaeology. We have also worked closely with ecologists, foresters, and wildlife biologists to better understand our ecosystems and to document the impacts of climate change and contaminants on our lands and animals. We have retained the leading experts to develop alternative economic perspectives on road development, hydroelectricity, and tourism. We are now training our own scientists and researchers through our Innu Guardians program, where we are using our own traditional knowledge and skills as the basis for effective monitoring and management of our fisheries, forests, and other resources. Our responsibilities for research and research will only increase as we transition into being Innu government under our Innu Land Rights Agreement. We know that we will need to make decisions and take actions even in situations where we don't have all the information that we need. Research will help us make good decisions in what we understand is a rapidly changing environment. It is for this reason that I look forward for future partnerships with the federal and provincial agencies, universities, and other researchers who understand that means that consent and collaboration are fundamental for research to contribute towards reconciliation. And I look forward to our discussions over the next couple of days. I'd also like to mention that Minister Kamutsi talked about the ban on the caribou. That's something that has been something that's been really difficult for our peoples. And as you know, for caribou, it has sustained our people for thousands of years. And now we come today to face the banning of the caribou. And then knowing my mother's generation, which was about 60 years ago, that they've never had to go through what we're going through now, which is to face the ban on the caribou. And it's very difficult, and it's not something that we see as illegal, but on the outside, but the eyes of the governments, it's illegal. And we were never taught that our culture and our language is illegal. And so that's something that today that we're still faced and in courts today. And it's been 7 years that there's been charges of people that have been going through the court, and 7 years today is still an ongoing issue. And so that's just one of the things that I want to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grand Chief. So I want to give everyone a round of applause for this really amazing panel. We could have days. You know, as everyone was speaking, there were so many things that came up in all of your comments and all of your talks and in the opening remarks as well. You know, pieces around respect and responsibility and reclamation and resurgence and renewal and rebuilding. But it's the piece around responsibility that I want to come back to. And President Russell, you said right at the beginning that researchers need to own their own histories and take responsibility for that. And I think there's a really famous quote from an Indigenous scholar, Linda Smith, who wrote a really keynote piece on research and decolonizing methodologies. She said, you know, for many Indigenous communities and peoples, research is a dirty word. And I think that this has come up. And so I was wondering if you would like to comment, say, you know, how can we move forward in this? You know, if we need to take responsibility for the own histories, and we need to look at the marginalization and the colonial oppression that has come through research and the research relationships, how do we move forward, particularly in Labrador, to do better? I mean, we need to do better, and we're starting to have these conversations, but it's a long journey. And I think I'm looking for leadership and guidance from the panel about how we can all move forward together in a way that does reclaim and renew and rebuild and take responsibility. It's a big question. Does anyone? Who gets to tackle it first?
Sure. I'll just. So one thing that comes to mind for me, I think, is around the whole mindset towards research and perhaps how sometimes. Oh, there's a little bit of feedback, so I'll just do that. I think in terms of the speed at which things are done, and I think in institutions very often there's either a pressure or to get things done quickly, and if we're going to move forward in a way where we're responsible to the communities that we're working with, there has to be flexibility So flexibility from the researcher, but flexibility from the institution as well, to understand that things that you can't necessarily always get things done in 6 months or 2 years, or, you know, there can't always be a set timeline. That it takes time, one, to build that relationship with the community. You can't just go in and expect that after one meeting that got that relationship established. It really takes time to build a relationship and to build a trust. I think that's essential to move forward in doing that. So I think when we think about responsibility, I think that's really important that we consider that, and that there needs to be that flexibility.
Maybe the question could go to the audience. There's a lot of researchers in the audience. How do you approach research in Indigenous communities? What questions do you ask yourself when you want to engage in that relationship with an Indigenous community or with Indigenous peoples on Indigenous lands? Do you come to grips with the fact that there is a history that is there, that there's, and that lives and breathes, and that will influence your relationship with the Indigenous people? Do you ask yourself that basic question as a researcher? How many people ask themselves these questions when you approach research? I think it's something just for you to reflect about. You know, I spoke earlier about the invitation. And in some ways I believe that in order for there to be proper research in Indigenous communities, there should be an invitation. And if there's going to be proper research, I think there should be a proper welcome. And if you're in my home, then there's got to be respect. And you need to respect who I am, what I'm about, and the place you're in. Of course, there's a responsibility on us to respect you as a human being, what you're doing, the way you've approached, the way you've come. Those are important elements, I believe, in a relationship. And I'll have to come back to those what I would call inalienable truths. That you can have a relationship if you debate identity, or if you debate the sense of place that people are in, and how these two are joined. And I say that because it's very personal to me. You know, the government of Canada has something called a land claim process. And in that process, they want you to do reams and reams and reams of research. They want you to prove that you were there, when you were there, what you looked like when your people were there. What do you look like now? What do you do now? And if sometimes you don't fit their paradigm or their stereotype, then somehow you're inauthentic. And this kind of research goes to underpin the government's policies around displacement, of undermining the doctrine of discovery, which says that nobody existed here before the Europeans or somebody showed up, that the land was empty. And so I say that because you rob our people and you perpetuate myths when research is not done properly and it's not done with understanding, with respect. And I know there's probably some of you out there saying, well, my gracious, we couldn't find the evidence. Well, the evidence should, the lack of evidence, should not be with you to reaching a negative conclusion. So this is why I'm saying that it's the approach that is very, very important, and the relationship, and how I believe you have some responsibility as researchers. We have a responsibility, I think, to impart some knowledge, some understanding as well. But researchers have a responsibility to try to understand that there are indigenous ways of thinking, that there are indigenous ways of being. I am who I am as an indigenous person. And just please try to understand that in some way, shape, or form. Or acknowledge at least that it exists. That there's an acknowledgement that there is a way of being as an indigenous person. And this really, very much comes down to relationship. So I think it's important to emphasize that, but I still want to go back. And I still want to say what a great opportunity that can exist when people are invited, welcomed, and that we approach a relationship in a good way.
Minister Kaminsky, did you have additional comments? I've seen you reach for the microphone.
I think it's very important to include the Inuit as partners in the research. Like, for example, with the Smart Ice program, on NES's research in the community of Rigolet, the Nain Research Station, in methylmercury. There needs to be, we need to be partners, or we need to lead it for it to be successful. And we use some of our research as evidence-based decision-making to make good decisions. For example, when we had a housing crisis, and we knew we had a housing crisis for many, many decades, especially in Maine and Hopedale, when we did our research that showed the housing crisis, it had made a difference. And we were able to secure some funding from the federal government to help with the housing crisis in Maine and Hopedale. And so research can be important, but it has to be either partnering with us or led by us.
In our experiences with research, I remember back in time when people started coming into our communities to do research, not really knowing what that meant, and just taking part in it, and then realizing after a couple of years, I guess, just what research meant for that person coming into our community, and how it opened doors for them, I guess, and then we realized that and said, no, we have to protect our language and our culture, because people would come in and ask us about our culture and our language, education, why kids weren't doing as good as the rest of Newfoundland. And that's one of the things that as researchers come into our community with open mind and willing to also learn and be a full partner, and something that at the end of the day, the outcomes are both satisfactory with us and the researcher. I think that's important, and also that we share that information with our communities. And because still a lot of people, I know in my travels that a lot of people don't know that we still have our language. And as people still go into the country to go hunting. And I'll share a personal story. My mother passed away more than 20 years ago. And the other day, just cleaning up the house, I came across a bone. It's a scraper that you clean, that you use to clean the caribou hide, take the fur off. And I came across that, and I phoned my brother, and I said, I've had this for 20 years now. And I said, I don't think Mom would have expected me not to use it. And I said, I have a reason why she gave it to me, or why it was passed down to me. And so I've got that out today, and it's something that I'm going to use in a couple of days. And I'll not share it with you, and it's not something that I'm going to hide. It's something that she passed on and wants me to clean caribou skin. So I'm in the process of that, and I'm going to use that tool of what she gave it to me, and I'm not going to put it up as something that just to sit on my shelf. And because that's something that we've learned and we've been taught growing up. And so at a larger scale, if the government wants to, we're talking about reconciliation and respecting, they have to come to the table with that mindset too of reconciliation and of respect, because they can't choose our life for us. It's us, it's people that choose our own destiny, and they're people, and it's difficult that sometimes that we may come to obstacles, but if people are full partners, you come to a resolution at the end of the day. And to me, that's what reconciliation and people coming into our communities is to come in, and at the end of the day that we find reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you so much to this amazing panel. My hand's actually cramping from writing down all of your wonderful things. There's so much richness here, and there's so much to discuss, and I hope that we can continue to have these discussions over the next few days and beyond. But we have just a few minutes for audience questions, and I could see a number of people sort of looking like they may have things to say. So if anyone has any questions for the panel, we would love to take one. Camille? Okay.
I was really interested in hearing you talk about the concept of humility, which I think is a very important thing to bring to the table. And I'd be curious to know what you think that actually looks like. Like a researcher coming into your communities with humility. What are some of the things that researcher would do to demonstrate that humility? That would be my question. Well, I think you're the one who raised it, but I'd be interested to hear from everybody.
Okay. I'm not sure if everyone could hear Camille's question, but her question was about humility and what that might look like in terms of a researcher who's coming into a community and how they might exhibit that humility. What comes to mind is a session that we had during Aboriginal Peoples Week around university research. And Dr. Tom Gordon, who is a retired professor at Memorial, who's also a lead on the Tradition and Transition Research Partnership with the Nuncio government, talked about his experience going into Maine when he discovered that there were these mounds and mounds of archival materials and sheet music in the Moravian churches. And I believe he was a director of the School of Music at Mana at the time, but a very experienced professor and researcher and musician. And knew how to read sheet music, so he went in with an idea, and I guess a bit of a research question in his mind already formulated. But when he went into the church and met with some of the elders, they said they would be happy to work with him, but they would need to teach him how to read the music. So rather than respond by saying, I already know how to read sheet music and I can do this and I can do that, he took a step back and was willing to be taught by the elder how to read this music. And I think that's just one example that of being flexible, but of being open to maybe looking at things from a different perspective, that you, as many researchers are experts in their field, they may, there's still a lot of things that they can learn, and they can learn things from a different perspective, and I think as Indigenous peoples, we have different ways of learning, different ways of viewing the world. And I think as researchers, to perhaps exhibit that cultural humility, that they may be an expert from one perspective, but to, I guess, be open to learning from others and being flexible enough to perhaps change their approach somewhat from their initial stance.
Yes. With humility, I believe it encompasses those words like openness and respect that you spoke about. But I think about when our older people, our traditional knowledge holders, impart a lot of information to say a young hunter or somebody who's harvesting about ice conditions, about weather, about the movement of the animals, about the migration of the fish, all of those types of things. If you don't accept that with a certain amount of value, with a certain amount of humility, you can get into a fair bit of trouble as maybe a young, inexperienced hunter or harvester. And so I think when researchers come with humility, it's in that type of a relationship. Not just acknowledging, say, Indigenous knowledge, but valuing Indigenous knowledge. And not just having it as a tick in the box that we've now included, but making sure that it is again valued for what it brings to that particular research project or the type of knowledge that it imparts. So when I think about humility, I mean, sometimes, people go out and hunt and fish and there's a certain amount of humility that comes with that. Respecting the older person, understanding the depth of the knowledge, the value of it. And I think in some ways a researcher should be in that kind of same frame of mind. That in some ways is paying homage in some ways to those who have come before, the vastness and the depth of the knowledge that exists while you're coming into a community or into a family or sitting across a table from an individual. So I think those types of things play in that sense of humility when one comes, not superiority, not one that has more staying power, more authenticity than another. So I think it's that sort of way that I see it.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to ask you.
What I can see is also for researchers not to come with preconceived ideas. They're trying to prove what they think is there. You need to get direction from the communities and from the people that you want to do research on. And it has to be important research. Research, again, like we mentioned before, that's really going to help our people, not just sit on a shelf and nobody look at it. And it's very important. And I've been a researcher in the past, working with different universities and organizations, so I know it's important to get a good relationship and a rapport, and to really get someone to go through the questions, because sometimes even questions can be biased. So we always have to be very mindful of respecting our people, the people that we want to do research with, not on, research with. Okay, thank you.
Well, with that ends one of the, just a wonderful, wonderful panel. There was so much thought and so much really profound questions that have been raised and really lifetimes of work for all of us in this room, and as we all think about how we do this and how we work together and how we move forward. And I think that this is actually a really wonderful time too to recognize our keynote speaker for this conference, Dr. Margaret or Maggie Kovach, who tonight will be speaking on these topics further at 5 p.m. on Indigenous research, Indigenous methodologies, and the power of Indigenous knowledges in informing research practices. So that's a really exciting way to kind of tie this day together. What we're going to have right now is a short 15-minute nutrition break, stretch break, fresh air, and then we're coming back for another really exciting plenary panel around caribou and peoples in Labrador. So with that, I want to thank the panel for just such a tremendous insight into how we can all work better together. Food and refreshments are all along the sidewall there.